What's up, YouTubers and plant lovers? It's Justin, and today I was going to show you how I replant my African violet. Now, you've probably heard of it called the African violet. I'm sure it has many other common names, but the scientific name is Saintpaulia ionantha. There are different species of it, but I have a purple one right here that is in massive need of fresh nutrients and a little bit of grooming and a repotting. So I wanted to show you how I do that and talk a little bit about flowering. It is very important to deadhead all the dead flowers on your Saintpaulia. So make sure that if you see them when they are spent, you go ahead and cut them off, and that'll encourage new blooms to start appearing. And as always, you want to make sure you sanitize any of your pruning shears or any tools that you're going to use that are actually going to come in contact with your plant. Now, most of these dead leaves here just pull right on out. So grooming your plant and all around just kind of taking care of it is really pretty easy for the most part. Where it gets a little tricky is they often need to be repotted twice a year. They end up using a lot of their nutrients relatively early on. And just to let you know, I do have my little bucket down here to catch any debris that I'm cutting off and getting out of the pot here. Now, as you know, African violets are native to North America and South America. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, African violets are native to Africa. I believe they are from Tanzania and like southeastern Kenya, kind of the tropical areas of Africa. Now, naturally, with their light requirements, they love a lot of bright, filtered light. They do not like direct sunlight at all because it will burn their leaves up and end up killing the plant if it gets too much sunlight. So preferably they like around maybe 10 to no more than 16 hours of sunlight, maybe in an eastern facing window with like a sheer curtain to kind of protect from the sun's harmful rays. So that they'll get ample morning light, and then, you know, protection whenever the sun is at its hottest and harshest. But like me, if you're like me, you end up keeping them under your grow lights, and they do like a lot of LED kind of filtered light, so you can actually keep them under there for around 12 to 16 hours, but you got to be very careful of that because there is a natural flowering hormone called florigen, and that actually triggers the blooming of the flowers, but that isn't triggered until nighttime. So if you aren't giving your plants at least 8 hours of nighttime or dark time, that won't trigger in your plant, and your plant won't bloom as well as it's supposed to. So if you do have it under lights, make sure you are giving it at least 8 hours of dark time to kind of recuperate and rest, and it'll actually help encourage your plants to grow. But like I said, you can do more than 8 hours, but at least make sure you give your plant about 8 hours of rest from all the light. Water with these guys can be really tricky too. As you may or may not know, if you get water on the leaves, I believe it's like cold water, it can actually lead to discoloration and spottingness on the leaves. So when you water, it's often better to kind of have your plant in a bowl like so, and water from the bottom and let the water kind of soak up through the pot, and you won't have to worry about messing up your leaves and leaving them unsightly, because if they do get those spots on it, it won't recover. That leaf will just be damaged from here on out. But there is a fine line with these guys, because as you know, too much water will lead to root rot, and too little bit of water will actually cause your plant to not really flower a whole lot and roots to die back. And if enough roots do die back, it will actually kill the plant. So make sure you are giving your plant a decent amount of water. It may take you a while to figure out what your plant needs, but they do like a, I don't know, I give mine probably anywhere from about 2 cups of water every 3 or 4 days. And like I said, I just kind of fill it up in the reservoir and let the plant kind of soak it up. It really should kind of feel like with the media, kind of like a well wrung out sponge. You do want it to be kind of moist, but you don't want it to be saturated and sopping wet all the time, because that will lead to root rot. And again, if you're not watering it enough, it will kill your plant and roots will die back and then harm your plant. And it definitely won't be flowering as well as it could be. So I've got a couple of okay flowers here, but they look like their stems are starting to die. So I'm just gonna go ahead and cut them all off. And hopefully with all this kind of pruning back, it will encourage him to actually start flowering again. Now I did my last video on this African violet probably around maybe 2 or 3 months ago, somewhere in that. And you can already tell that he's starting to get a little leggy. He actually does need to be repotted pretty bad. But flowers or African violets that aren't pot bound do not flower that well at all. So in order to flower a lot, they actually do have to be fairly pot bound, and ones in smaller pots will often flower more than ones in larger pots. And this is a 6-inch plastic pot, and I'm gonna go ahead and go for the 6-inch terracotta pot. So all I'm gonna do is just go ahead and loosen up the root ball, take the plant out and kind of sift through it with my root rake and my root hook, and then kind of prune some of the roots back a little bit, and then add in a whole bunch of new potting media and just kind of pack him down a little bit and kind of go from there. Now, as always, I always suggest that you do water your plant at least about 24 hours before you have to repot. It'll make it a whole lot easier. So I'm gonna dump this water out down in here, set this bowl down, and then I'm gonna go ahead and start gently kind of squeezing the root mass here, just to kind of loosen the root ball up. And since it's all pretty well saturated, it'll make it a lot easier to go ahead and pull him out. Now, the roots of the African violet are generally pretty shallow. They kind of go out more than down. So we have to be pretty careful and not squeeze really hard. They are very sensitive and kind of small. And you actually have to have a really lightweight kind of potting mix whenever you're planting your African violet. If you use kind of gardening and a mixture of potting mix and gardening mix, it may end up being too heavy for the roots, and it could end up crushing the roots and causing your African violet not to really bloom or do its best. Now with this mixture, there is no actual dirt or, kind of dirt that you would find outside. It's all kind of cocoa coir, sphagnum moss, a little bit of peat moss, and just a whole bunch of lightweight stuff that won't actually kind of crush the roots of your Saintpaulia. So now I'm going to go ahead and put soil on the bottom, just enough to kind of cover up the bottom quarter of the pot. And I do have it in kind of like an azalea pot that is a little bit wider than it is deeper, because again, the roots do kind of go out. So we'll go ahead and tilt him over and kind of use my hands to get underneath the leaves to kind of gain a little bit of support there, and then sift some of this, as you won't be able to see, but I'm tipping him over kind of into the bucket and holding him just kind of like that with the fingers. And again, I've already washed the new container out with hot soap and water, and then I've sanitized with isopropyl alcohol. Any of my tools, they're gonna come into contact with this plant at all. Now, again, I said these roots are very fine and very sensitive, so be very careful. Take your time and do not apply a lot of pressure. Now, once you get it to about where you like it, you can actually use your fingers to kind of loosen up some of it. But like I said, the roots are very small, and it doesn't take much to actually rip them out and hurt the plant. So be very careful, take your time, do not rush, be gentle, and just kind of lightly caress the dirt away. And you don't want to take away a whole bunch of it, just enough to kind of actually move some of this out of the way to kind of give rise to fresher nutrients whenever we put it in the pot. And as I said earlier, they do like to be slightly root bound, and those that are will flower more. So if you take off too much, it's going to have to make up for all that before it actually starts to flower again. So don't go too crazy when moving some of this soil out of the way. Alright, now I'd say about half of it is gone, maybe a little bit more than half, but I'd say about right there should be okay. Knock out a little bit more, and then I will go ahead and trim some of this longer stuff back. I don't know why I said stuff. Trim some of these longer roots down. And again, mainly the reason why they want you to repot every 6 months is because it'll use up the nutrients relatively fast. And as you can tell, the pots or containers that these plants are grown in don't actually have a large reserve set aside to actually store nutrients like some other house plants would. And plants outside, they're not dependent on growers to actually give them their nutrients without overdoing it, but plants on the inside are dependent on us. So if you've repotted and it's been a couple months and you haven't fed and your plant is not blooming, that is probably why. It does need a decent amount of nutrients in order to keep on flowering all the time. And if you don't see flowers, it'll just kind of sacrifice its ability to make flowers to make sure it actually does survive. So if you are feeding it regularly, then you're doing okay. And you do want to use a fertilizer that is specifically designed for African violets, because they do like rather acidic soil. And again, they'll have their specific nutrients that they'll need in order to thrive, along with its kind of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium requirements that all living plants need. So be on the lookout for that, and that's what I use. In fact, the African Violet Association of America recommends that you do not use a fertilizer that drives its nitrogen from urea, because it can burn the roots out of the plant and actually kind of leave your plant looking distraught and not up to its best. So again, you want to actually use something that is designed for African violets. But for the most part, any kind of general all balanced fertilizer will be okay for them. And plants that often flower will need more phosphorus than they do potassium or nitrogen. And if you're actually giving your African violet more nitrogen, it may actually start growing lush foliage at the expense of flowers. Nitrogen is very important, as we know, in the growth of leaves and stems. Phosphorus is very important for healthy roots and flowers. And then potassium is actually very important in the accretion and movement of carbohydrates throughout the plant. So you want to make sure that your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potassium levels aren't too high, something maybe around like an 8, 14, 9, because again, you want to have more phosphorus because that will help with the flowers. Now remember, the roots are very fine, so I'm going to press this down, but not too hard, because I don't want to crush the roots. Now you can see mine is up a little bit higher than I wanted it to be, and it's because I put too much soil in the bottom. But over time, as I water it and the air bubbles kind of disappear out of it, it'll flatten out some. But whenever you're repotting, you want the leaves to kind of be flush right around the edge of the pot, not up like mine is. Mine is kind of ideolated right now because I had him under the 500 watt lamp. but he was pretty far away, so he really wasn't getting the adequate light that he needs. So I moved him closer to my smaller ones, where he'll get much more personalized light that he'll actually be able to kind of use and hopefully flower a little bit better. Now, you may not be able to see, but there's a lot of dirt on these leaves, and as you can tell, the leaves are really hairy, so it'll hold on to a lot of dirt. All you need to do is to take either a nail brush that your girlfriend or boyfriend might be using for their nails, or a paintbrush, and just kind of brush the leaves off anytime these leaves get rather dirty, because you can't spray it off or get them wet, because they might actually start to discolor and look rather unsightly. So just use a paintbrush or a nail brush to kind of get that all out of the way. Alright, now as I said earlier, they do like acidic soil, right around 5.6 or 5.8 to 6.2, somewhere in between there is the perfect acidity for these guys. Now the only thing left I need to do would be to go ahead and water this plant. Now I will use distilled water like I always do for my more sensitive plants, and again I will pour water into this plastic reservoir that I've created down here. So either use a saucer or one of these plastic little plant dishes, saucers underneath there to kind of hold the water in, and then the plant will kind of soak it up through the soil and up through the roots and be fine there. The last thing I wanted to talk about with the African violet is the pests. They do have a problem with cyclamen, mites, scale or mealybugs, and thrips. Now the cyclamen mites are really hard to actually get rid of, so if you do find that you have those, it may just be best to throw your plant out and start over again, because they kind of get down all over in the plant, and I've never had them, but I hear they are a nightmare to get rid of. And then the mealybugs are really hard to get rid of too, because they kind of get down in the crown and the crevices, and you can't really get them out, and you have no way to actually kind of spray them or actually get to them with any kind of insecticide or anything, so it can be rather hard too. Now with most other plants, I would suggest either spraying your plant off or using kind of some isopropyl alcohol on a washcloth or a Q-tip to kind of fight them off, or rinse them or knock them off the plant. But with the African violet, that is a little bit trickier. If you do use room temperature water, it really won't hurt the leaves to get water on the leaves, but if it's colder water, colder than room temperature, it will leave those little white marks on there and hurt the plant. So again, as long as you are watching the sunlight, the light requirements, it likes a lot of bright, filtered sunlight, no direct sunlight on there, because these leaves will burn in nature. They are normally found kind of on the ground or like in trees somewhere, but they're always shaded by the crown of a tree, so they don't get a whole lot of bright filtered light in nature, and in your home they don't like a lot of it either. So I use LED lights, but again, an east facing window would probably be best, especially if you had a curtain down in front of it too. Watering is very tricky because root rot can be done relatively fast with these guys, so you want to kind of err on the side of caution and not water it as much, but roots that don't get a lot of water will die off, and then consequently that will kill the plant. So there is a very fine line with that. And if they're not getting a lot of light and a lot of water, they won't bloom a lot either. So as long as you're watching the light and the water, you should be okay. Temperatures, they cannot survive a freeze or frost at all. They don't like it really colder than like 55 degrees. So I keep mine at about 65, 70 and room temperature, and they are right at home there. They do like a decent amount of humidity, especially after repotting. If you notice that it is looking rather sick, you could take it and put it in like a bread bag and twist it up and then put some water down there, and the humidity of that will probably help your plant out too. Other than that, you just kind of really got to be careful. There are so many different varieties, species of this plant with the two-tone flowers. Some are doubles, some are single. I mean, they really are just an all-around great plant to have. I know my grandparents had some of them, and my mom had a couple, and I have some. And they do flower most of the time throughout the whole entire year, but they do need some breaks in between. So if they're not flowering, just give them a little bit of time to relax and kind of hold off on a whole bunch of the nutrients. And then as you start to see blooms again, you can uptake the water and the humidity. But like I said, they cannot get too cold. They are from the tropics, so they don't really have a long rest period, but they do need some rest when they're flowering all the time. So just be mindful of that if you don't see any blooms on your plant. You don't have to throw it out. Well, guys, leave me a comment and let me know what's your favorite kind of African violet. I love the purple one, but I used to have this massive white one that unfortunately died a couple years ago. I do have pictures of that on my Instagram if you want to check those out. And let me know if you've ever had any kind of success or failures with the African violet. Like I said, everybody's grandma just about had one, or their mom, or they have one. So they are great plants. You find them at Lowe's and Walmart and Home Depot, but you got to be careful. Make sure you get a healthy specimen because you want them to stay healthy and look good while you have it. Until next time, guys, hit the subscribe button or the bell next to it. That way you'll know anytime I've uploaded a new video. You guys take it easy. Have a good one, and don't forget, always plant prudently. Thank you, YouTube. Real quick, I wanted to thank my Patreon subscribers. Pam donated again this month. If you're interested in donating to my Patreon, check the link in the description box below.